guy Mike McAllister for a McAllister Monday. And Mike, you had a good weekend. I feel like the Eagles won. Syracuse took care of business. Vibes must be good for you.
Yeah, until you got to talk to Tim and I, Mike. We apologize.
Yeah. Outside of that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was great. And, got to go to the game with my son and sit in the stands, and he was excited because he got to stay up late. So it was a good weekend. And then, obviously, Sunday enjoyed beating the Chiefs for the third time in a row. So I'm sure Bills fans can appreciate that as well.
Right. Well, what were your takeaways, Mike, from a Colgate win like that? I know everyone was just hoping to see a little bit more of a clean performance from the offense. There was less of the procedural issues we saw the week prior, but what stood out most to you after the Colgate game?
Well, Steve Angeli looked real sharp. I thought throughout that entire game, didn't really have any questionable moments as far as his decision-making or passes or anything like that. I thought he looked really good, and it's interesting that he's actually only 2 yards, I think, if I have that correctly, behind Kyle McCord's pace from last year through 3 games. So it's, as much as I said before the season, we're not expecting that Steve Angeli's going to lead the nation in passing again. Here we are. He's right there. So kudos to him, despite the struggles in early stages of game 1 and then most of game 2. He's right there. So I was impressed by that. I thought the offensive line was better in some respects, but the running game was still not to the level that I was hoping to see, even without Yassine Willis. Obviously the fumble from Will Nixon was certainly an area of concern, but and defensively, I thought they tackled better at times and showed some positive things early, but there was a little stretch there in the second half where it got a little bit hairy. I know there were some backups in there and things like that, but you still don't expect that Colgate was going to have as easy of a time as they seemed to have moving the ball during that stretch. So there's still, some areas of concern moving forward.
What'd you make of him putting Angeli back in there when you're already up big?
Well, I mean, in one sense, I'm like, man, if he gets hurt, then he's going to get crushed for this, right? But at the same time, I think it was more so to send a statement of like, guys, this is not acceptable. Yeah. What's been happening here with the backups? I think that was the main message more than anything was, throw Angeli back out there. He goes out there, has a nice drive, leads them to a score, and sort of allows Fran to turn to the rest of his guys and say, all right, now that's what we're expecting. Yeah. I don't care that you're backups, And so it was, I think, to send a message as much as anything. Certainly understand the fans that didn't like it because they're worried about their starting quarterback getting hurt. But, I think that was the primary motivation behind it.
Where have you seen Steve's game grow from this Tennessee game to now, he'll be making his 4th start come Saturday down in Clemson?
I think it's like anything else. The game slows down a little bit, and you think that they've sort of gone down in competition from each game, and now it's going to ramp back up, of course. But, you go from Tennessee to UConn and then UConn to Colgate, you're sort of stepping down each time. And I think that helps in some respects because, he had some of the issues in week 1 and then had some of that again in week 2, but it allows him to sort of work through those things and then process those things and try to work on some of those things. But he certainly looked more comfortable. I think that comeback against UConn might have been the moment, if he's good for the rest of the year, that we point to and say that's kind of when things clicked, when the light bulbs went on. It just seemed from the moment that Justice Ross Simmons caught the touchdown pass on 4th down that the offense has just felt like we feel like we're going to score on every drive now. Similar to what it was last year, where it felt like every time they were out there, you thought they were going to score. And when they didn't, it was a surprise. And they started to get a little bit of that vibe towards the end of the UConn game and then for most of the game against Colgate. But what last year's team had that this year's team doesn't is a consistent running game behind LaQuinn Allen. They're still searching for that this year, and they're going to need that as they start to get into conference play because you can't be a team that runs the ball for 1.5 yards, 2 yards a carry, and then throws the ball 50 times every single game and expect to win all the time. You have to have games where you can rely on that running game, where you can use that running game to close games out as well.
Hawaii tried it for years with Timmy Chang. He just threw 70-some times a game. That's it.
Yeah. Sometimes that's the recipe for success. We saw them throw it all over the place last year, and I think it is trending more towards that, although like you said, Mike, without Yasin Willis, that makes a difference in how much you're going to run the football and how effectively you're going to run the football. Mike, I can't remember off the top of my head what your overall win-loss record prediction was going into the season, but we're now
7-5.
7-5. Okay, we're now 3 weeks in. If I gave you the opportunity to change that prediction, would you change it one way or the other after the first 3 games?
No, I don't like doing that, to be honest with you. Like,
yeah.
I made a prediction before the season. It's almost similar to, like, everyone fills out a bracket NCAA tournament time, right? And then they always give you that option of, hey, redo a bracket now that we're in the Sweet 16. and I've never done that because I feel like, look, I made my prediction. It's probably going to be wrong. That's fine, but I'm sticking with it. I'm not changing it and then going to act like, oh, look how smart I was, you know? So just like the last game of the regular season, if they're sitting at 5-6, I'm not going to say, oh, I'm predicting 6-6. Look how brilliant I am.
Sure, yeah.
You know, but I just don't. I stick with my original prediction until it's not mathematically possible anymore. So even though the path to getting there isn't what I thought, because I predicted in that 7-5 that Tennessee was one of the 7, but despite that, as long as it's still mathematically possible, I'm going to stick with it.
You touched on the defense a little bit. You said, you know, the tackling has improved over these last couple of games. Like, does it concern you with this defense that they're not able to get after the quarterback, or is it not a concern because, let's face it, they're keeping teams out of the end zone? That's the main part of a defense.
I mean, ultimately, that is the main part, right? If you can minimize the number of points they're scoring, that's a great thing. So that's certainly something that is, I don't know that there's a specific, other than, you know, points scored, but there's a skill in that's not necessarily tangible, like, oh, it's because they're getting this many turnovers or this many sacks or this is their pressure rate or whatever else. It's just one of those things that some teams, some defenses are just good at. And Syracuse seems to be one of those teams over the last couple of years that is good at figuring out ways to get stops in critical moments, to limit teams in the red zone, limit them on third down, and keep teams from racking up huge point totals on them. There's a skill in that. There's a non-quantifiable talent to being able to do that. And we've seen it 2 years in a row, essentially now. It'll be interesting to see if they can keep that up in conference play, especially against a good Clemson team this coming week, even though they've had their share of struggles on the offensive side of the ball. But, yeah, I mean, I'm still concerned about the ability to get consistent pressure on the quarterback. I'm still concerned about the run defense. But at the same time, I do think you have to give them credit for being able to make the plays when they need to and being able to tighten up in the red zone and keeping teams out of the end zone.
Since you went there, a Clemson team that has struggled offensively, like, is it trying to get pressure on Cade Klubnik that has allowed these teams to beat, Clemson and, have them start 1-2 this season? How do you see, like, Syracuse kind of playing the game against the Tigers?
That's certainly part of it. I think that's kind of where you start, is you got to be able to pressure them. Then they've also got some good running backs, so I think you got to be able to stop them running the ball. But the biggest area of concern that I have, because I've seen, Colgate's quarterback did this a little bit, which is using that scrambling ability and that escape ability. Tennessee's quarterback did that a little bit. UConn's not as much, but he's not as mobile of a guy as those other two. And Cade Klubnik is extremely mobile. He can really hurt you with his legs. And so that's an area of concern I have going into this game, is how Syracuse is going to be able to account for the legs of Cade Klubnik. Are they going to spy him? How are they going to handle that? How are they going to game plan for that? But the biggest thing is, once you get there, and you had the opportunity to get him down in the backfield and set up a second and long or a third and long, you have to take advantage of that. You can't let him slip through those and then turn that into, even, on 2nd and 7, turn a 5-yard loss into a 5-yard gain. Now it's a 3rd and 2 instead of 3rd and 12. I mean, that's a huge difference. And if you do that 3 or 4 times a game, that can be the difference between 3 and 4 scores or 3 and 4 punts. So that's the biggest area of concern I have going into this game.
Mike, depending on where you look right now, the line is 16.5, 17.5. I've seen it as high as 19-point favorites for Clemson this week. I know last week Clemson opened as a 9-point favorite against Georgia Tech. Then all of a sudden they're 3-point favorites, and of course they didn't cover. Does that surprise you, seeing that line be that many points for Clemson? And what's just your early lean on how Syracuse matches up?
It does feel like it's a larger line than I would have expected, given how Clemson has looked. But again, the teams they've lost to are also good teams, right? They've lost to LSU and Georgia Tech. That's nothing to sneeze at. It's not like they lost to UConn and Colgate, for example. So I certainly understand it to some extent. I think this goes back to people still thinking pretty highly of the talent that Clemson has throughout the roster. But kind of the same feeling I had going into the Tennessee game, which is I expected that Tennessee was going to be the favorite. I wasn't necessarily expecting a 14-point favorite. Now, Vegas knows what they're doing much more than I do, but similar going into this game, 16 or 17 seems high. So does that mean that they're asking you to take Syracuse because they want you to take Syracuse because they believe Clemson's going to win in a blowout? I'm not sure. We'll see how it plays out.
Mike, I can't get you out of here without asking you a recruiting question. And with the UCLA firing and with the Virginia Tech firing, anything on the recruiting trail as far as those guys, decommitting and maybe, Syracuse being in the mix to get a couple of them?
Yeah, it's still a little bit too early to tell, but there's certainly some commitments on both of those lists. Players committed to each of those schools that would be intriguing if I'm Syracuse. There's a defensive back that's committed to Virginia Tech, Xavion Cleveland. He took an official visit to Syracuse over the summer, so he's someone that you wonder, would Syracuse sort of kick the tires around there and say, hey, are you willing to take another look at us with the situation going on there at Virginia Tech? They've got a 4-star offensive lineman that's committed there. Syracuse wasn't really involved in that recruitment, but you can never pass on elite-level offensive linemen, so do you take a look there? There's a kid from Massachusetts, Carter Gooden, I believe is his name, 4-star defensive lineman who's committed to UCLA. Syracuse was involved with him, was trying to get him on campus over the summer for an official visit. He ended up going to Penn State instead of Syracuse, but again, that's someone that Syracuse was involved with, that they were trying to get on campus for an official visit. The fact that they didn't means that they could now. So can they try to talk him into coming to visit and see if they can make their pitch at that point? Those are just a few of the names that I'm kind of monitoring, but certainly anytime you have an in-season firing of a head coach, it's prudent to do your due diligence at a minimum, and I expect the Syracuse coaches will certainly do that.
Yeah, it's just interesting that it's less than 4 games in, so these guys have decisions to make. You could save a season basically if you want.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Mike. Well, we got to let you go, but we appreciate the time as always. Always great stuff, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, there's Mike McAllister, our Monday guest, as always, here on Orange Nation. We still have